He was about 6 feet tall, that he was completely scourged all over his body. He was crucified, and nobody dies for a lie.
The Passion of the Christ wasn't simply another biblical adaptation. It was the first time a filmmaker attempted to recreate, with unfiltered brutality, what truly unfolded on Golgotha more than 2 millennia ago. It was meant to be a film, but the production quickly turned into something far stranger. As cameras rolled, the cast and crew began noticing things no one could explain. Moments that felt more spiritual than cinematic. Unusual coincidences, sudden conversions, strange sensations on set. It was as if the boundary between acting and living the story had collapsed. The suffering portrayed in front of the lens suddenly felt disturbingly real, and those behind the scenes couldn't ignore the feeling that something beyond filmmaking was happening. Then came the events no one could rationalize. What are the chances that lightning would strike the lead actor twice in the same place? Or that production would be plagued by a string of uncanny accidents? 10 in total? Even today, those mysterious moments remain one of the most debated parts of modern cinema. Hollywood wanted nothing to do with the project, but against every prediction, the impossible occurred. A film spoken entirely in ancient languages, with no famous faces, no promotional machine, and no studio backing, spread through the world like a wave. Millions of believers treated it not as a movie, but as a spiritual encounter batter. It shattered records, becoming the highest-grossing non-English film ever released. Yet with that massive success came an equally massive cost. The spotlight turned harsh, and Mel Gibson soon found himself descending into the darkest chapter of his life. But the story didn't end there. 2 decades later, the man Hollywood tried to break is returning with a promise to finally explore the mystery between the crucifixion and the empty tomb. His long-awaited sequel, The Resurrection of Christ, aims to reveal what happened in those unseen hours between death and dawn. To understand how he reached this moment, we have to go back to the late 1990s. At that time, Gibson appeared to have achieved everything an actor could dream of. He was the face of Braveheart, a global star, a symbol of power in an industry that treated him as untouchable. But behind the glamour, his personal life was disintegrating, his marriage was collapsing, and alcohol had become a dangerous escape. In later interviews, he admitted he felt hollow, aimless, and overwhelmed by a sense of self-destruction. He once said plainly, "I didn't want to live. I was ruining everything I touched." That confession revealed a man crushed beneath the weight of success, guilt, and emotional exhaustion. Then something unexpected happened, an event he would later describe as nothing short of divine intervention. One night, consumed by despair, he dropped to his knees and prayed with a desperation he hadn't felt in years. Though raised in a strict Catholic home, he had long drifted away from the faith of his childhood. But in that moment of brokenness, he reached for a Bible, and something inside him reawakened. From that night onward, he began reading scripture daily. He immersed himself in the Gospels, returning again and again to the accounts of Christ's suffering. In those stories, raw, haunting, and full of meaning, he discovered something he had lost long ago, a sense of purpose. Years later, Gibson would openly admit that those moments reshaped his life and eventually led to the creation of the most controversial religious film ever made. Gibson would later sum up his awakening in a single haunting sentence: "I was a terrible man. My sins were the first to nail Christ to the cross." That admission became the spark that ignited everything that followed. Acting no longer fulfilled him. Awards didn't matter. Fame felt hollow. What he wanted, desperately, was redemption, and he believed the only path toward it was to tell the story that had shattered him from the inside out. The brutal, unfiltered sacrifice of Jesus. This wasn't conceived as a Hollywood screenplay. It began as a personal vow. Gibson immersed himself in every account of the passion he could find: scripture, the Stations of the Cross, and especially the visions of Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, whose descriptions of Christ's suffering were so precise that archaeologists later confirmed details she had never physically seen. Her writing struck him like lightning. If he was going to make this film, it would have to feel real, not symbolic, not softened, real enough that audiences wouldn't just observe the passion, they would experience it. That conviction led to one of the boldest filmmaking decisions in modern cinema. Gibson chose to shoot the film entirely in the languages of the time: Aramaic, Hebrew, and Latin. No English, no modern phrasing, and even more shocking, He refused to cast any Hollywood stars. He didn't want familiar faces. He wanted Christ's story to stand alone, without the glow of celebrity to dilute its impact. To the studios, this sounded like madness. A film spoken in dead languages, with no recognizable actors, no commercial appeal, and a level of violence few audiences had ever seen. Executives didn't hesitate. Every meeting ended with the same word: no. Gibson remembered how blunt they were. Some predicted it would be the biggest financial disaster in history. Others insisted he rewrite it, soften it, modernize it, make it more uplifting. They wanted the passion without the pain, but Gibson refused. "If I change that," he said, "it's no longer Christ's story." Or that realization pushed him to a crossroads. If the movie was going to exist, he would have to do it himself, so he took a leap that most filmmakers would never dare. He sold property, emptied accounts, and personally invested nearly $45 million, every security he had, into a film no one believed in, no studio, no safety net. If it failed, his career and finances would collapse overnight. But Gibson wasn't gambling for fame. He was pursuing redemption. He later admitted, "It wasn't a movie I wanted to make. It was a movie I had to make." Walking that lonely path distanced him from the Hollywood system, but it reconnected him with something he felt he'd lost: his faith. And that single act of defiance would eventually reshape the landscape of religious cinema forever. But before the cameras could roll, one impossible question remained: who could portray Jesus? Gibson knew this wasn't simply a role. It required someone willing to step into unimaginable physical hardship. This wasn't about delivering lines or choreographing emotion. The actor would have to embody pain, surrender, and a love strong enough to change the world. For months, Gibson rejected well-known names. The moment a celebrity entered the role, the illusion would break. He didn't want viewers thinking about an actor. He wanted them to see Christ. And then one name surfaced: Jim Caviezel, a devout Catholic, soft-spoken, with a calm, piercing intensity in his eyes. He wasn't the most famous actor in Hollywood, but something about him felt right. He carried a stillness, a gravity, that matched the story Gibson wanted to tell. Jim Caviezel had built a respectable career with roles in The Thin Red Line and Angel Eyes. He was rising, but not yet a household name, and that was exactly what Gibson wanted. So he invited Caviezel to his Malibu home for a brief conversation that unexpectedly stretched into 3 hours. What was meant to be a casting discussion became a raw conversation about faith, suffering, and the heavy responsibility of portraying the most consequential life in human history. Before the meeting ended, Gibson gave him a blunt warning: "If you take this role, Hollywood might shut its doors on you forever." The room fell silent. Caviezel considered it only for a moment before answering with a line that stayed with Gibson for years: "Every one of us has a cross to carry. Either we shoulder it, or it crushes us." And then something uncanny happened. As they talked, Caviezel casually mentioned that he had just turned 33, the traditional age of Christ at his crucifixion. Gibson's expression changed. Then Caviezel added, almost jokingly, "Oh, and my initials are JC." Gibson stared at him, stunned. "You're freaking me out," he whispered. For both men, that moment felt like more than coincidence. It was as if something unseen was guiding the project, pulling it forward with a force neither of them fully understood. From that point on, Caviezel committed with total seriousness. His preparation wasn't only physical, though he would endure extreme physical punishment during filming. Spiritually, he threw himself into the role. He prayed before scenes, attended daily mass, and spent hours immersed in scripture. But nothing could prepare him for what he was about to experience once filming began, because the set of The Passion of the Christ didn't feel like a typical film set. Crew members later described the atmosphere as charged, unnatural, or simply different. One moment the air would be still, the next a sudden gust would tear through the equipment. Gibson had chosen the rocky cliffs of Matera, Italy, a region not known for violent weather. But during filming, the sky seemed to change without warning. Clear mornings collapsed into storm clouds in minutes. Tents were ripped from the ground, lights toppled. It was as if the environment itself was responding to the story being told. Most of the crew shrugged it off as weather, until the day everything changed. They were filming the Sermon on the Mount, one of the most hopeful scenes in the entire movie. The air was crisp, the ground smelled of damp soil, and Caviezel was preparing to climb the hillside. Technicians adjusted microphones and focused their cameras. Then, with no warning, the sky darkened. Caviezel later said a chill ran up his spine, as though the air itself had paused. And then the impossible happened. A blinding white flash tore through the clouds. A bolt of lightning exploded downward and struck Caviezel directly head to foot, engulfing him in light. The sound was deafening. Cameras instantly shut down. Crew members screamed and ducked for cover. For a few seconds, everything was still, as if the world had stopped. Gibson, watching from a distance, saw Caviezel standing there, his hair crackling, his body wrapped in a strange glow. He had survived. Jan Michelini, the assistant director, sprinted up the hill to reach him. But before he could speak, another bolt ripped through the sky and struck the exact same spot. 2 lightning strikes in less than 60 seconds. Both men were thrown to the ground by the shockwave. The odds, nearly 0. Some crew members broke into tears. Others began praying aloud. When paramedics arrived, they found the 2 men alive, with no burns, no broken bones, only shaken nerves and the faint smell of ozone on their clothes. No one could explain it. After that day, the atmosphere on set changed. Even skeptics began crossing themselves before filming. And strangely, the weather seemed to mirror the scenes. Dark during suffering, bright during moments of mercy. But the mysteries didn't stop there. When it came time to film the scourging sequence, Gibson insisted on an unfiltered level of realism. Caviezel stood with a protective board strapped to his back to absorb the blows. But during one take, a whip swung just slightly off angle. The metal tip flew past the board and slashed directly into Caviezel's back. The scream captured in the final version of the film wasn't acting. It was a cry of genuine agony. "I couldn't breathe," Caviezel later recalled. "My body went into shock." It didn't just happen once. He was struck a second time, harder. The blow ripped open his skin in a gash nearly a foot long. That scar remains to this day. And yet the suffering was far from over. The most grueling sequence was still ahead. The Way of the Cross. Gibson refused to use props. The cross Caviezel carried was real wood, over 150 pounds. Under the scorching sun, Caviezel staggered, fell, got back up, and fell again. In one take, a soldier was supposed to catch the beam as Caviezel collapsed. He missed. The full weight of the wooden cross came crashing down onto Caviezel's head. "It crushed my head like a melon," he later said. "Some of the blood was fake, but a lot of it was mine." And still, that was not the final injury he endured. The weight of the cross finally pushed Caviezel's body past its limit. During one of the falls, the wooden beam slammed into him so hard that it dislocated his shoulder. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. Crew members rushed toward him in panic, but Caviezel waved them off. He refused to cut the scene. He wanted that fall, that moment, to remain exactly as it happened. He wanted the world to understand, even if only for a heartbeat, what it meant to collapse beneath the weight of a cross. Gibson understood instantly. He kept the cameras rolling. In the footage that appears in the final film, every grimace, every gasp, every desperate crawl is real. Caviezel's twisted expression wasn't acting. It was the raw, unfiltered agony of a man pushing his body past its breaking point. The crew could feel it. The audience would later feel it too. Doctors confirmed the shoulder dislocation moments after the scene ended. They urged him to take time off, days, at least, to recover. Caviezel refused. He returned the next morning, his arms swollen, his shoulder numb, determined to finish the story he had given his life to embody. Gibson later admitted they never reshot the fall. What viewers see in the movie is exactly what happened. No rehearsals, no Hollywood tricks, only truth. But the challenges were far from over. As production moved toward the crucifixion, the weather turned brutal. The final scenes on Calvary were filmed in the heart of winter, with Caviezel suspended on a cross for hours at a time, soaked by icy rain and stripped down to a thin robe. The wind slashed across the hilltop like knives. Crew members tried desperately to warm him between takes, but nothing helped. His body temperature plummeted, eventually. The medical team gave the diagnosis everyone feared: hypothermia. His lips darkened, his fingers trembled, his breathing slowed. Still, Caviezel refused to come down. "Christ didn't come off the cross," he whispered, "so I won't either." What followed was a test of endurance few actors in history have ever faced. The relentless cold triggered double pneumonia. He grew weaker by the day, his weight dropping rapidly. Makeup artists spent up to 10 hours applying wounds and prosthetics. But time was so tight that Caviezel began sleeping with the makeup on. His skin cracked. The adhesives created blisters. His face became raw and irritated. Yet he pressed on, scene after scene, hour after hour. There were no stunt doubles, not for the falls, not for the lashes, not for the crucifixion. Every shiver, every spasm, every tear was genuine. The performance had moved beyond acting. It had become a kind of penance, body and soul offered up to portray a story that demanded everything. Some crew members pleaded with Gibson to stop filming. He refused. "If he can endure it," he said softly, "so can we." For Gibson and Caviezel, this wasn't about spectacle. It was about honesty, a truth so deep it couldn't be reached without sacrifice. During the crucifixion shots, the cameras stayed on even as Caviezel winced from uncontrollable muscle spasms caused by the freezing wind. There were no clever cuts, no softened angles, no attempts to hide the suffering. Everything that made the final edit was real. By this point, after lightning strikes, genuine lashes, a dislocated shoulder, hypothermia, and pneumonia, something shifted around the set. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't exhaustion. It was presence. A strange, overwhelming sensation as if the very landscape was watching. Even the non-religious crew members felt it. The atmosphere grew thick, heavy, reverent. During the most agonizing moments, an unnatural silence would settle over the hilltop. Not a footstep, not a whisper, only the wind, and occasionally, quiet sobs from someone who could no longer hold back tears. Several crew members later admitted they couldn't tell where the acting ended and faith began. Some retreated behind the set to cry. Others found themselves praying, even if they hadn't prayed in years. Gibson, normally composed, was often seen stepping away with red eyes, whispering prayers under his breath. Makeup artists, overwhelmed by the long nights and the emotional weight, reported feeling a mysterious calm in the midst of chaos. And then there were the lights. More than one technician swore they saw brief flashes, glimmers that appeared and disappeared without any source. The lead cameraman insisted he witnessed a glowing figure pass behind Caviezel while filming the crucifixion. A white shape, moving silently across the frame. Yet when they reviewed the footage, nothing. Word spread quietly among the team. Whispers about strange shadows, unexplained movements, moments that felt like more than coincidence. Even the skeptics didn't laugh. No one wanted to dismiss what they had seen or what they felt. Everyone sensed the same thing. Something was happening on that set that couldn't be explained by filmmaking alone. Some crew members began whispering about strange visitors who appeared on set, men dressed in white who quietly walked between cameras, calmly offering precise instructions on lighting angles or framing, then vanishing before anyone could ask who they were. They looked composed, carried an undeniable authority, and spoke with a confidence that suggested they belonged there. Yet no one on the production team had hired them. No names matched their faces. And when still photographs and footage were reviewed later, these men were nowhere to be found. Not in production stills, not in behind-the-scenes recordings, not even on the security cameras. It became one of the most persistent rumors from the entire shoot. Gibson would later say, "There were things no one can explain, but everything happened exactly as it was meant to." The intensity of the atmosphere grew so strong that, for many, filming felt less like work and more like a spiritual retreat. Extras who had arrived as non-believers asked to confess or be baptized before they returned home. Some actors embraced faith for the first time. One of the most remarkable conversions came from Luca Lionello, who portrayed Judas Iscariot. Before stepping onto the set, Lionello openly identified as an atheist. He didn't believe in God, and he certainly didn't believe a movie would change anything. But weeks of filming the betrayal, the despair, and the remorse left a mark deeper than he expected. After the movie wrapped, he sought baptism for himself and his family. "I came in as a non-believer," he said later, "but portraying Judas forced me to confront the figure of Jesus. I discovered forgiveness. The film changed my life." And he wasn't the only one. Another transformation occurred during the filming of the scene before Pilate, when Barabbas is released. Pietro Cerubi, who played Barabbas, barely had any lines. His part was almost silent, just a moment where he locked eyes with Jesus as the crowd screamed for crucifixion. But that single look changed him forever. In interviews, he later recalled, "When I looked into Caviezel's eyes, I didn't see an actor. I felt a depth that wasn't human. I saw Jesus looking at me." The moment haunted him for weeks. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't shake the sensation of being forgiven. After filming, he too embraced faith, was baptized, and eventually wrote a book titled From Barabbas to Jesus, describing how that one exchange transformed his life. Even among the main cast, there were quiet miracles. Maya Morgenstern, who played Mary. The mother of Jesus was secretly pregnant during filming. No one knew. Not the director, not the cast, not even the makeup team. She later shared that her condition gave her a presence that couldn't be fabricated, an inner radiance that seemed to pour into every gesture. Gibson admitted he had been drawn to her name, Morgenstern, meaning morning star, one of Mary's ancient titles. To him, it felt like a sign, but the most haunting role belonged to Rosalinda Celentano, cast as Satan. Gibson wanted a figure that defied category, something unsettling, neither entirely male nor female, a cold beauty that disturbed more than it attracted. They shaved her eyebrows, filmed her in slow motion to prevent blinking, and overlaid a man's voice to strip away any sense of humanity. Her diet was reduced to almost nothing. Her appearance became ghostly, fragile, almost unreal. Then came the scene that would embed itself in cinematic history. Satan gliding through the mob while cradling a grotesque infant, its face wrinkled, its eyes mocking. A twisted parody of the Madonna and Child. A portrayal of corrupted love at the exact moment the soldiers began whipping Jesus from the front. Mel Gibson placed the scene at the emotional peak of Christ's torment to show hell rejoicing in what it believed was victory. Filming that moment left Rosalinda broken. She spent weeks preparing in silence, isolating herself emotionally. On set, she later said, the air felt heavy, almost poisonous. After production ended, she stepped away from acting entirely, retreating into painting to recover from what she described as the darkest role of her life. Meanwhile, Jim Caviezel seemed to enter another realm altogether. Many said he was no longer performing but inhabiting something sacred. His eyes changed. He spoke softly, almost prayerfully. Some crew members recalled watching him stare at the sky between takes, as if listening for something they couldn't hear. When the final scene, the resurrection, was filmed, an extraordinary stillness swept across the set. The cold remained, but the atmosphere shifted. Light filled the tomb, and many on set broke down crying. It didn't feel like the ending of a film. It felt like release, as though everyone had been holding their breath for weeks. When Gibson finally whispered "final cut," the words echoed with a weight no one expected. People looked around with the same unspoken thought. Something holy happened here. When production wrapped, Gibson returned to Los Angeles filled with fire. He had risked everything, his money, his reputation, his future. And Hollywood rejected him again. The big studios wouldn't promote the film. It was too violent, too religious, too unprofitable. But Gibson refused to surrender. He spent $15 million of his own money to distribute it independently, screening it in churches, schools, community halls, anywhere people would gather. The studios mocked him. They thought the film would disappear. They were wrong. On February 25, 2004, Ash Wednesday, The Passion of the Christ arrived in theaters. There were no red carpets, no billboards, no celebrity promotions. And yet from the first day, crowds lined up around entire city blocks. It looked less like a movie premiere and more like a pilgrimage. People held rosaries. They waited in silence. Some prayed softly under their breath. The Christian world had awakened, and it was only the beginning. News spread quickly. Churches began organizing entire caravans to see the film together. Parishes purchased tickets for entire neighborhoods. And theaters, normally half empty on weeknights, overflowed. What had started as Mel Gibson's personal quest became something far larger. A communal act of faith echoing across continents. In many cities, screenings felt less like movie showings and more like spontaneous liturgies. Priests held brief prayers before the lights dimmed. Some celebrated Mass afterward. Viewers walked out in silence, tears streaming down their faces, as if they had just experienced a spiritual revelation rather than a 2-hour film. The physical reactions were unlike anything theaters had seen. People fainted during the scourging scenes. Others became dizzy or left the auditorium until they could breathe again. In Kansas, a tragic incident made global headlines. A 56-year-old woman suffered a fatal heart attack during the crucifixion sequence on opening night. Yet even this only intensified the sense that something deeper was unfolding. In Brazil, Mexico, Poland, the Philippines, across Catholic and Protestant nations alike, cinemas turned into temporary cathedrals. Pastors preached about the film from pulpits. Prayer groups multiplied. Something unprecedented was happening. And then came the impossible. The Passion of the Christ became the highest-grossing non-English film in history. The numbers stunned the industry, more than $610 million worldwide. over $370 million in the United States alone, outperforming every major blockbuster of that year. A film spoken entirely in Aramaic, Hebrew, and Latin, with no Hollywood stars, no marketing campaign, and no studio support, became a global earthquake. For nearly 20 years, it held the record as the most successful R-rated film in U.S. box office history. Its impact revealed something Hollywood had refused to see: a massive, devoted Christian audience waiting to be acknowledged. And yet, instead of opening doors for Gibson, this massive achievement unleashed a storm. Critics launched a relentless attack. Reviews were brutal. Journalists accused him of fanaticism, of glorifying violence, of dragging medieval prejudices into the present. The New York Times said the film revived ancient hatred. The Guardian dismissed it as torture masquerading as cinema. Some branded Gibson a zealot. Others accused him of inciting division. The word anti-Semitic dominated headlines. Commentators debated whether Gibson had placed blame on the Jewish people for Christ's death. Calls for censorship circulated. Professors wrote essays. Panels argued on live television. But while critics battled each other, audiences kept filling theaters. Years later, Gibson would speak openly about why he refused to soften the film. Christ's suffering wasn't symbolic, he said. I didn't want a poetic version. I wanted people to feel the weight on one man's body. He explained that every time he considered trimming a violent moment, something inside resisted. It felt false, he said. That pain wasn't just Christ's. It belonged to all of us. He insisted the film wasn't meant to shock. It was meant to honor. Sometimes the truth hurts, he said. But if he endured it out of love, the least I could do was not hide it. To accusations of anti-Semitism, he answered calmly, Jesus was Jewish. Mary was Jewish. The apostles were Jewish. How could I hate his own people? I didn't film hatred. I filmed redemption. On Hollywood's rejection, Gibson became even more direct. They didn't want this film to exist, not because they didn't understand the message, but because they understood it too well. When asked years later if the struggle had been worth it, he didn't hesitate. Yes, I'd do it all again, because I saw hearts change. That's worth more than any award. But as soon as the film premiered, Gibson said he felt something shift, a spiritual counterattack, as if an unseen force declared war on him. The praise, the protests, the arguments, it all struck him at once. He withdrew from public life. Interviews became rare. For months, he avoided cameras. While millions discussed his film, he entered a deep silence. And in that quiet, the pressure crushed him. Old wounds reopened. Anger, guilt, alcohol. The shadows he had fought for years resurfaced with terrifying force. The faith that had sustained him during filming now felt distant. His personal life descended into turmoil. The man who had carried the weight of the most controversial religious film in modern history now found himself battling a darkness that threatened to undo everything. The paparazzi circled him like vultures, waiting for the moment he would slip, and eventually, he did, 2 years after The Passion's release. In 2006, Mel Gibson was arrested in Malibu for driving under the influence. In a drunken rage, he shouted remarks that would echo across the world in minutes. His outburst became the story of the year. A few seconds of anger that erased decades of his career in the eyes of the media. It wasn't a scandal. It was a public execution. Photos of him in handcuffs spread like wildfire. The press attacked without mercy. Hollywood shut its doors instantly. The same man who once won Oscars and directed Braveheart suddenly found himself in exile. Friends disappeared. Invitations ceased. Even years later, Gibson admitted, it wasn't a stumble. It was a crucifixion. In interviews long after the incident, he revealed that during this period he fell into a dark spiral. He considered ending his life. He felt humiliated, abandoned, spiritually shaken. After The Passion, everything went dark, he said. It was like I had awakened demons I didn't know existed. For years, he vanished from the spotlight. He avoided ceremonies, interviews, red carpets. His personal life crumbled. Lawsuits, rehab, and isolation followed. The same faith that had sustained him during filming now felt distant. Everything seemed lost. And yet, in that darkness, something began to take shape. A spark that would grow into his most ambitious project ever, the continuation of the Passion of the Christ. But before returning to Gibson's resurrection, we must look at the man whose life was equally shaken, Jim Caviezel. In the early 2000s, Jim Caviezel was exactly the kind of actor Hollywood loved to elevate. Tall, striking, grounded. Studios saw him as the perfect blend of spiritual gravitas and leading man charisma. Gregory Peck meets Tom Cruise. After standout performances in The Thin Red Line, Frequency, and The Count of Monte Cristo, he was considered one of the most promising stars of his generation. Directors wanted him. Magazines praised him. His career trajectory was ascending fast. Then, The Passion of the Christ premiered, and everything stopped. The role made him instantly recognizable worldwide. His blood-streaked face became an icon. But Hollywood recoiled, doors closed, phone calls ceased, scripts evaporated. Caviezel said it plainly during a 2011 conference. "They told me my career was over, and they were right, but I'd do it all again." He was branded difficult, extreme, too religious. Some executives considered him radioactive. For years, he survived on scattered roles and modest appearances. Instead of renouncing the film that cost him everything, Caviezel embraced it. He traveled the world speaking about faith, suffering, and the meaning of sacrifice. Meanwhile, the industry continued to freeze him out. His agent dropped him. Media outlets mocked him. Social media attacked his beliefs. He even received threats for his outspoken Christianity. But Caviezel did not waver. He anchored himself in his family and his faith. With his wife, he adopted 3 disabled children from China and raised them out of the public eye. Rumors grew that he had been placed on an unofficial blacklist. Caviezel put it bluntly, "I went from being one of the most sought-after actors to not getting a single call. I didn't do anything wrong. I just played Jesus." Instead of collapsing, he began serving, visiting prisons, speaking at churches, helping missions, participating in spiritual retreats. And slowly, the tide turned. In 2011, nearly a decade after being pushed into the shadows, Caviezel received an unexpected offer, the lead role in the TV series Person of Interest. The show ran for 5 seasons and reintroduced him to a wide audience. But his true cinematic resurrection came in 2023. Caviezel starred in Sound of Freedom, an independent film about a former U.S. agent fighting child trafficking. Every major studio refused to distribute it, but the Christian community embraced it. Social media propelled it, and the movie exploded into a global sensation, earning over $250 million, surpassing blockbuster films from Disney and Warner Brothers. Once again, Caviezel succeeded the same way he had before, with a film Hollywood rejected. Asked how he felt about this miraculous comeback, he said, "When the world shut its doors on me, God opened a much bigger one." As audiences rediscovered Caviezel, Mel Gibson was rising again as well. After years of isolation and personal struggle, he returned to the very origin of his spiritual journey, the empty tomb. From the beginning, he had never intended The Passion to stand alone. He always believed it was only the first chapter in a far greater narrative. The next chapter is the resurrection of the Christ. Gibson spent years writing in secrecy with his brother Donald and Braveheart writer Randall Wallace. He described the script as an otherworldly experience, something no eye has ever seen. In a recent interview, he summarized it with one haunting phrase: "It will be a mystical journey, a descent, and then an ascension." But this film will be far more than a simple continuation. Gibson wants to explore what happened between death and dawn, between Friday and Sunday, the hours where scripture is silent but ancient texts whisper. The story will span Christ's descent into Hades, the Redeemer breaking the gates of the underworld, confronting the realm of death, freeing the souls who waited through centuries for the promise to be fulfilled. This vision draws from apocryphal writings, early Christian theology, and fragments from the Gospel of Peter. It won't be symbolic, it will be cosmic, a spiritual battle played out between heaven and the abyss. Gibson describes the tone as a fusion of spiritual terror, overwhelming hope, and divine radiance. If the Passion revealed the broken body, the resurrection will reveal the victorious soul. He is not aiming for violence this time, but transcendence. Not brutality, but glory. His goal is not to retell scripture, but to plunge into the mystery that changed history, the third day. In a conversation with Stephen Colbert, Gibson said, "This will be the greatest event in human history. We all know suffering, but few understand what happened after the cross. Christ didn't just rise, he conquered death itself." Jim Caviezel has said the same, calling it the largest, most ambitious film ever attempted, 5 times more epic than The Passion. Production has been delayed repeatedly, not because of money or actors, but because of Gibson's relentless perfectionism. He refuses to move forward until every detail feels divinely aligned. And perhaps that's exactly why the world is waiting. Mel Gibson has spent the last several years returning to the very places where the Passion was born. He revisited the rugged landscapes of Matera, Italy, the same hills that once became Jerusalem, and began rebuilding a first-century world with even greater historical accuracy. He has worked quietly alongside theologians, archaeologists, and biblical scholars, shaping a timeline that traces every moment between the crucifixion and the morning the stone rolled away. The film promises to reveal the apostles' shock, Mary's wordless grief, the Roman soldiers' confusion, and the unseen turmoil in the spiritual realm. Until finally, the veil tears open and a new light bursts into the world. Gibson calls it a journey from the terror of death to the eruption of eternal dawn. But he has hinted at something even more extraordinary. During a private conference in 2023, Gibson revealed that the film will contain a sequence unlike anything ever attempted, an image of the afterlife inspired by the Book of Revelation and the Messianic Psalms. The project is so vast that it will be released in 2 parts, separated by a sacred symbol, the exact number of days Christ remained on earth after rising from the dead. Part 1 will premiere on March 26, 2027, Good Friday. Part 2 will arrive 40 days later, on May 6, 2027, Ascension Day. The 40-day gap is not marketing, it is liturgy. Gibson insists he aligned the calendar with faith, not finance, hoping audiences will experience the story rather than simply watch it. For years, fans expected Jim Caviezel to reprise his role as Jesus. Caviezel himself confirmed he was ready. But in 2025, Gibson surprised everyone with a bold artistic decision. The new film would feature an entirely new cast. He explained that every generation must encounter Christ with fresh eyes. The new Jesus will be portrayed by Finnish actor Jaakko Otonen, joined by Mariella Garriga as Mary Magdalene, Kasia Smutniak as the Virgin Mary, Pierluigi Pacini as Peter, and Riccardo Scamarcio as Pontius Pilate. The budget surpasses $100 million, more than double that of The Passion. But money is not the greatest challenge. The difficulty lies in portraying a realm no camera has ever seen, the space between life and death. Gibson's team is consulting theologians, historians, and visionary artists to depict the spiritual dimensions where darkness tries to contain the light, and where Christ tears apart the chains of damnation. Producers say the film will weave together early Christian writings, apocryphal traditions, and careful biblical exegesis to dramatize Christ's descent into Hades, the moment the Messiah breaks open the underworld to liberate the righteous. Gibson explains that he isn't trying to provoke controversy. He wants to reveal truth. The Passion showed suffering, he says. The resurrection will show power. This time, the tone will shift. Less blood, more mystery, less physical agony, more spiritual warfare. Not just a story about resurrection, but about a cosmic victory unfolding across heaven, earth, and the unseen realm. Gibson isn't competing with Hollywood superheroes. He is offering an answer, the story of the only one who conquered death. I don't want to show how Christ rose, he says. He says. I want to show why, not for himself, but for us. His purpose can be summed up in one line he recently shared. The Passion showed how much he loved us. The resurrection will show how far that love went. After the global success of The Passion of the Christ, Hollywood suddenly turned its attention to a demographic it had ignored for decades: believers. Studios studied the data and were stunned. Surveys revealed that 10% of viewers reported some kind of spiritual change after watching the film. 18% said they prayed more often or returned to church. This sparked a wave of Christian cinema. God's Not Dead, Heaven is for Real, War Room, Miracles from Heaven, but none ever replicated the original's impact. The Passion remained untouchable, a phenomenon, a mystery. In some Muslim countries, the film was banned. In parts of Europe, critics attacked its brutality. But these controversies only added to its legend. What Hollywood saw as a box office anomaly, millions experienced as something supernatural. Theologians and psychologists have studied the film's aftermath for years. Their conclusion is consistent. The Passion triggered a deep emotional and spiritual catharsis, something far beyond entertainment. Around the world, viewers described life-changing experiences. People reported overwhelming peace, spontaneous tears, dreams, moments of forgiveness. family reconciliations, even healings. Thousands described a presence, something warm, heavy, calming, resting on them during the crucifixion scenes. Others felt a weight lift off their chest, as if something inside had broken and been released. A woman in Argentina claimed she partially regained her sight while praying during the film. A man in the Philippines said he heard God speak to him in the midst of the scourging. In Italy, a young addict walked out of the theater and abandoned drugs on the spot. In Brazil, a priest shared that an entire crowd spontaneously began confessing through tears. The testimonies are endless. If you felt something while watching the film, if something stirred inside your heart, awakened your spirit, or brought you back to God, share your story below in the comments. Tell what you experienced, what moved you, what changed inside you. Your testimony might be the seed that ignites someone else's faith, because the truth is simple. Faith spreads from flame to flame.